All right, Nicky Gavron, I would love it if you would open our discussion today.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for that. And a very warm welcome to all of you to this event on sustainable wood. As you know, it's part of London Climate Action Week, and there's a lot going on, a real lot going on. So thank you very much for choosing to be with us this afternoon. I thought it might be useful if I introduce myself, because although I know quite a lot of the names that have registered, there are also many that I don't. So, and also perhaps to explain a little bit about why Scott asked me to open this event. Well, I've said I'm Nicky Gavron. I've had about over 3 decades now of experience of working on the built environment and on planning, and a lot of focus on making London a sustainable city. I was the first Deputy Mayor of London. I led on the first London Plan, and I led on London's response to climate change. And as part of that role, I set up the C40, a club of international cities, a network really, of international cities collaborating to cut carbon. Collaborating to cut carbon because directly or indirectly, cities are responsible for most of the world's emissions. And it's no exaggeration actually to say that the battle against climate change will be won or lost in cities. Now, the built environment, the existing built environment and new construction are huge emitters. And I think most of us realize that steel, concrete, cement in it, of course, and iron ore are responsible for double figures, probably about 15% of GHG emissions. So we will, of course, get to decarbonizing steel, and eventually we'll find new forms or forms of low carbon concrete. But we can't afford to wait. This decade is the race to net zero decade. It's a tipping point in that race, and we have to find new ways forward. We need a materials revolution. We need to substitute high carbon materials with low carbon materials. And it's that that has led me to become very interested in natural products, in bio-based products, bio-based materials as part of the bio-based economy. And in fact, in the Northern Hemisphere, which is where our focus is today, it's wood that really is the most amazing material for our use. I think we all know that our world's woodlands and forests are a massive asset, a great carbon sink. And I've also become aware that in fact, with responsible management, we can recycle, reuse our timber, and that it's a renewable resource. And it just doesn't meet circular economy principles. It's actually a great form of carbon capture, remarkable form of carbon capture and storage. And I've been really grabbed by the thought, I don't know if you are, by the thought that we can actually now, to a certain extent, grow our homes, grow our infrastructure, grow our furniture. And that leads me on to letting you know that a lot of what I have learned, a lot of the knowledge I have has come from the Cities for Forest network and from conversations with Scott Francesco, who's going to talk next, and Scott, who is the co-founder of Cities for Forests. And of course, there are others in the room too, who've really helped me on this journey. But I'm still on a learning curve, and I guess many of us in this room are, when it comes to actually thinking about the best way forward, the best choices in terms of sustainable procurement, sustainable wood, timber, how to make good choices. And so that now leads me to opening up to Scott. And here's a question for you, Scott Francesco. How actually are we going to be able in the future to source timber sustainably, to make sure that we procure it well?
Thank you so much, Nicky. Can I ask if everyone can see the slides on the screen? The Cities for Forest cover slide? Yes, great. Nicky, it's been such a privilege to get to know you over the last few years and to have your enthusiasm and incredible depth of experience to add to our network. So thank you for that. Thank you for all of the help that you've been in introducing us to important voices in this space. I'm here representing Cities for Forests, which is a network of cities from around the world. And really, our experience is based on the experience of others. So this is very much about learning through discussion. And I hope that's what's going to happen today, is that through these voices that you'll hear and the conversation following, we'll all come away with a renewed interest, experience, and information to bring to this challenge. I want to start with some stories because I feel like stories are often the best way that information is carried. I grew up with wood all around me. This is a photograph of my mom taken yesterday by my dad, where in our family home, there was a butcher block made of solid walnut that we gathered around. So I grew up with wood and stories about wood's origins as part of my life. In Canada, canoes and boats are often made of wood. So there's sort of a pervasive wood background in my life growing up in Canada. So it's really no surprise, perhaps, that my life as an architect took a turn towards thinking about wood and sustainable sourcing. And that's taken me all over the world and thinking about wood from many different angles. And in every case, it's really just about listening to people and learning from people that are doing this. What are they doing that works? How are they doing it? What can we do better and do differently? From sawmills to forest management. It's an incredible mosaic of strategies, people, and approaches out there. When I moved to New York City in 2005, I fell in love with the Brooklyn Bridge, and it wasn't long before, looking at the boardwalk of planks on the Brooklyn Bridge, I realized that this tropical hardwood came from somewhere, and I didn't know where, and that led me on another journey, which was to think about partnering with a community that was producing wood sustainably for the replacement planks of that bridge. And that became a life project to think about that connection between cities and forests. Zooming forward about 10 years, actually got married on the Brooklyn Bridge to a tropical forest ecologist. So this makes the situation even more real. This is about the relationship between cities and people and the wood itself becoming a connector. We also co-host and have founded a network called Wood at Work, which brings people together from around the world to collaborate on the use of wood in urban structures. But it's also about the sourcing and origins of wood. And our son Peter here in the upper right-hand corner, who's a product of that marriage on the Brooklyn Bridge, is doing some reclamation here and creating coat hooks from recovered branches in the city. So that's some background. So Cities for Forests is a network of almost 70 cities from around the world and growing. We work at 3 scales. We work in the inner forests, inside the cities, nearby forests, and very importantly, faraway forests. These are forests that are often thousands of kilometers away from cities, but are absolutely vital in the success and health and well-being of cities. And in the faraway forest group, we have a number of activities that we're working on. We're gathered here today to talk about sustainable wood for cities, about procurement, but we also have a partner forest program, action plans on forest footprints, and a number of publications. But fundamentally, this is about what is the relationship between cities and forests. As Nicky said, cities are responsible for the vast majority of atmospheric carbon, but tropical forests alone are responsible for about 10% of direct emissions. And if you actually look at the possibilities for decarbonization, that number goes up to about 33% just in tropical forests by avoiding deforestation and restoring forests. So the relationship is tremendous to creatively link the interests of cities and the interests of forests. So that's background, but if we just look at a particular aspect of the challenge we're facing, urban growth and housing in the coming decades is absolutely crucial. Africa alone is looking at needing to construct about 235 million new housing units by 2050. And if you think about the implications climate-wise of that, they're absolutely astounding. Meanwhile, we know now that we can build with wood. The technology is there, the buildings are there to show it, they're beautiful buildings, but not all wood is good for the environment. And this is where the Sustainable Wood for Cities project really begins with how can cities know the difference between wood that is potentially good for the environment, good for climate, and wood that is perhaps not so good. One of our network friends took this photograph the other day on the right. This is Canadian Forest Management. And you look at a picture like this and you think, wow, is this good or is this bad? And the truth is, that's not necessarily an easy question to answer, and especially if you're in city government. So meanwhile, the need for wood, the interest in wood is there. And so cities increasingly can use wood for many infrastructure elements, on the ground. We can build all kinds of things out of wood today and are doing that today. And that's really exciting. It's exciting for planners, for architects, and for sustainability leaders. So really the question then is, what is sustainable wood? And that's what we're setting out to answer. We see this through 4 interacting systems. There's, what is the impact on forests? Is there going to be more forest or less forest when you're done with this, with sourcing this wood? What is the net CO2 storage? How much CO2 can you actually account for in your wood after all of the inputs are considered? We know that wood is 50% carbon by weight, but that doesn't account for all of the waste and energy inputs going into that. So understanding that's very important. How does wood displace other materials? If it's effective in displacing high carbon materials, that's a credit to wood sustainability. And what are the social benefits? We cannot have sustainability if we do not have social sustainability underpinning the sourcing of wood. And where does this kind of wood come from? The truth is it can come from all parts of the world, from small tropical forest enterprises to large scale, more commercial and industrial forests. Again, if those criteria can be met. Knowing where wood comes from is difficult for a city. It's very complex. Supply chains are not straightforward. And by the time it gets to a city, it can be quite confusing. And so one of our challenges is, can we make the sourcing of wood more transparent? Can there be a more direct sense of transaction between the supplier of the wood from the forest and the people right through to the city? And even more so, can we really build that relationship so that there is a kind of sense of mutual connection, mutual benefit between the source of the wood products and the city? So Sustainable Wood for Cities is a guide. It's available now. It's in its beta form. It is live. Cities are using it. It's a platform to help city leaders look at wood through a sustainable wood focus. There's 8 pathways for sourcing that can be combined to form strategies for wood sustainability. There's an evaluation system internal to this and a process to build capacity. And so we're here to share this with you and to talk about it today. I won't go into this in detail, but this is a kind of a map of how the web platform works. There's the guide, there's all kinds of background resources and forums that for a city that can actually work through a process and come out the other end with more confidence and understanding of sustainable wood and what it means for them through their values, through their objectives and sustainability goals. So it kind of looks like this. We have these pathways. This is a place to start. These are 8 categories of thinking about sustainable wood that have come through a lot of dialogue with our network. Certification, social forestry, selecting species and grade, global geography and jurisdictions and legality, local urban wood. Can we get wood from inside the city? Can wood be used for a long time? And can we reuse wood? How is the efficiency of wood production related? It's very important. If we're wasting 75% of the wood before it even gets to the city, can that really be considered sustainable? So efficiency is important. And accounting for the carbon in the wood as a separate piece is very important. And these can be combined into strategies for particular projects. In the platform, we have this matrix that cities can use and sourcers can use to look at how these pathways can be added together to create these strategies which build on each other to create maximum sustainability benefits. I won't go through it again, but these 8 pathways each have their own sort of zeitgeist and their own definition of what that pathway is. But again, the real concept is that these can be combined and added together to create deeper sustainability outcomes. As I mentioned, these pathways have come through these communities of practice. I mentioned a few of them. Cities for Forests is the one that we're working with most intensely right now. Wood at Work, Future of Forest Working Communities. These are places where we've brought folks together to talk about these, to really understand the full breadth of what sustainable wood can look like. And so today's panel is an extension of that. We have a really amazing panel of 8 folks representing these 8 pathways. They're each going to give their perspective on one of the pathways. And then we're going to, after the panel is done, they're each going to take about 3 or 4 minutes. And then we'll have time we've got some city representatives who we're going to ask to bring some questions and thoughts to the panel. And then we're going to open up for wider conversation. So with that, I'm going to ask Rosie to step up, and Mac is going to share a video and some slides from Rosie.
Yes, of course. One moment.
We've worked out that in the last sort of 10 years we've used about 18,000 metres cubed of timber, all of which is FSC certified. And having something like FSC project certification, it puts the framework in place to literally guarantee that you're getting responsibly sourced timber on your project. But the timber that we use in the project ranges from anything from this little pipe block that we have here, which is used for supporting the pipes in the M&E installation, right through to the timbers that you do see, like the roof structure here at Crossrail. We know we've got assurance that all the way through the supply chain, the right thing is being done, both socially, environmentally and economically. But we're also getting the benefit of a compliant SDG supply chain as well. FSC means that you can prove that it's responsibly sourced.
I should have introduced you better, Rosie. Rosie is representing the certification pathway and is executive director for FSC UK. So perhaps that's evident from the video. So in general, the panelists are going to introduce themselves and their pathway as they get started. But Rosie, thank you for bringing certification to our attention here.
Thanks. So yeah, I'm from the Forest Stewardship Council in the UK. And as Scott's mentioned, the use of wood in construction can help us combat climate change, but only if we ensure the future of our forests. And this means not only checking that the timber is from a legal source, but that it's sustainable. And assuming you've made the decision to source sustainable wood, you need to have some way of knowing where your wood was sourced from and whether the source was sustainable. And that's where this forest certification pathway can help. As Scott says, it can be quite complex, those supply chains. So under FSC, the forest source is independently assessed, and then the material from these forests is tracked through the supply chain through chain of custody certification. FSC is about more than legality, it's also about sustainability. The forest management standard looks at issues such as the rights of Indigenous people, health and safety issues, protection of rare species and high conservation value forests, management planning, and it looks at monitoring and assessing that. We also have an ecosystem services verification procedure that allows for you to make specific claims on the impacts of carbon, water, soil, biodiversity, and recreation. And the chain of custody standard aims to ensure that you're not inadvertently mixing non-certified material with the FSC material. So this pathway helps you to know that your timber was responsibly sourced without you necessarily tracking it all the way back to the source yourself. Next slide, please. basically your job is to specify that you want FSC, whether it's tropical timber, engineered wood products, panel board, whatever it is you need. I showed the video about Canary Wharf, and this slide shows the Olympic Park. There is a huge amount of FSC out there to suit your projects. So you find a certified supplier, you specify certified material, and then you check through your sales documents that you've got what you asked for, basically. And we've got a lot of guidance to help with this. And I think it's important, as has already been stressed, to say that these pathways are not mutually exclusive. There are clear synergies that we can explore from the social aspects of FSC, promotion of lesser known timber species, ecosystem services verification, and the use of reclaimed material. Unsurprisingly, I see forest certification as a potential quick win. If you embed it in your procurement policy, educate your staff, and specify certified material, there's your first step on this journey. I'm going to leave it there. There's so much more I can say, but hopefully the video showed you that it can be done on a big scale. It's been done at the Olympic Park. So thank you. I will leave it for the discussion and listen to the others now.
Thank you so much, Rosie. That's great. And just to be clear, the certification pathway it takes a broad approach to certification. FSC is one of the world leaders, of course, in certification. There are other systems out there. And the way that that our approach takes it is that really getting deep into what certification means for your project is a way to accelerate those benefits. You can see that in the pathway. I'd like to bring Mark Van Benthem to the podium. Mark is representing the social forestry pathway.
Yes, thank you, Scott. Planning to share my screen. Is it working?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't hear Scott anymore. Thanks. Yes, thank you, Scott. Thank you, Rosie. I was asked to briefly introduce how social forestry can be linked to responsible procurement of wood for cities.
Mark, if you go to, I think you're sharing both the presenter and other view. So yeah, I think that's the one you want to hit.
Is this the one?
I think so. Try that.
It's pretty black, pretty dark now, right?
Do you have a tip?
No, this will work, Scott.
Okay, let's just go for it. We can see it. You can see it.
You'll see the next slide already. So there go my surprises. Anyway, I thought I'd briefly introduce our organization because I don't think all of you know Stichting Probos, which is quite Dutch, but Probos translates to Pro Forest. You might be familiar with Pro Forest in Oxford, the UK. We're not linked to that. We are not-for-profit working on sustainable forest management and afforestation. And we are good in translating science into practice and also policy into practice. And for instance, with regards to this policy, we've been assisting the Dutch government for the last 15 years in, well, first drafting their procurement policy, but also helping it implement and helping procurement officers implement it. And we are very much a data-driven organization. We very much believe that data is crucial for informed decision-making. So that's one of our tasks we see for ourselves. And data is also good on indigenous peoples and local communities. The FAO mentions that about a third of the privately owned forests are managed by local, tribal, and indigenous communities worldwide, and they do that very well. This is a report of this month, and it stresses very well how local communities are among the best stewards we have for our forests. It also explains fairly well that there's also huge pressure facing them. So it's not something we should take for granted, and we should see how we can support those communities. So I think we need to build bridges. And one of the ways to build bridges is ensure we source from responsibly managed forest, like Rosie also explained already. We've calculated last year that the potential impact of the EU and the UK tropical timber imports on semi-natural and natural forest can be positive on 80 million hectares worldwide if 100% would be sustainably sourced. And it even goes beyond it, because this would assume all timber goes to let's say these markets, and we know that there is market diversification. And of course, you would have huge impact also on climate mitigation. So it's key to ask for those products coming out of these responsibly managed forests. And if we would seek actively also to source from social forestry, the potential impact would even be larger. There's no surprise, I think, that there's a lot of social benefits if you source well and from the well-organized communities. And there's also a potential spin-off, increased income via, for instance, non-timber forest products or ecotourism there. So how can we build bridges? Well, I think Scott and his team are very much doing so via their Cities for Forest program, also in the framework of this Partner Forest program. And I think one of the things I very much like about this program is that it is about storytelling. We have a very scarce product, which is tropical timber coming out of natural forests. And we need to be able to give the right price to these products. And storytelling adds value to these products. We can make that more tangible also if we would incorporate award criteria in tenders. Besides all the stuff Rosie also talked about, we could perhaps think of award criteria for fair trade products. But, and that's especially a task, I think, also for the forest and timber sector, and especially now also, well, challenging, but also more chance for success with this, with timber being fairly scarce at the moment, is we need to tackle some challenges. But there are opportunities there, and to increase indeed the sourcing from social forestry. And I would also like to leave it there, and thank you for your attention, and I look forward to more discussion in a minute.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was wonderful. I'd like to invite Lisanne de Witt to come to talk to us about the species and grade selection pathway. Take it away.
All right. Hi there. One moment, I will share my screen.
I'm not sure if Mark needs to unshare first or if I just will try that, Mark. Great.
And can you see my full screen now or
Yeah,
not?
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Lisanne. I work for Vandenberg Hardwood. We are an importing company based in the Netherlands. And we are focused on strong and durable hardwood, mostly from Southern America. We are a promoter of, well, I think we can say we are a promoter of sustainability in our sector. We have decided to only source FSC certified products. And actually this combination of, yeah, if you want to work with sustainability in this sector, it naturally leads you to using a wider variety of species than just a couple of well-known ones. Because one of the basic principles of FSC is that you don't only use what we are demanding for as customers or as users, but also what the forest has to offer. This is a picture that I shortly want to share to you, because this is the concession of one of our suppliers. And what you can see is throughout these 20 years, surrounding this forest, big parts of the forest are getting lost, for example, for agricultural use. And therefore, I think the key to sustainable forestry is like the two elements you find in this question. So how can a forestry company, on the one hand, be economically viable and thus sustain its business, and on the other hand, while keeping the forest in good condition? To me, yeah, this is the answer, is sustainable forestry via various ways that are shared today. And the one that I would like to share from our company perspective as well is the species and grades perspective. If you want to source a product that is also, yeah, good for the forest, so to say, you have to keep two things in mind. And the first one is that a healthy forest consists of many tree species. For example, in Brazil alone, there are 7,000 tree species, and so far more than like the 3 or 4 that we commonly known from a customer perspective. The other element, and I'm sure that everybody knows, is that a tree is round. It's something we all know, but what we should also be aware of is the big implications this has for sustainability. Because if you see this picture, if we would only ask for like the widest planks or the biggest ones, the longest ones, we could only use like a very small part of the tree that actually we're cutting. Well, if we go for also smaller sizes and combining different products to long lengths again, you can use a far bigger piece of this tree than you would otherwise be able to. From the forest perspective, it means using a variation of species and also the lowest grade needed. And what I mean with that is forests consist of different species. Some are very durable, some are very strong, and some trees are less strong and less hard, for example. So the moment you are building as a municipality, for example, bridges or wharves, you should go for those very strong species. You really need the strength and the durability, because they have to deal with water contact, they have a high load that they have to sustain. Well, if you go down in this list, all the way up to street furniture, playgrounds, or facades from buildings, the species you use, they don't have to be like the most strong anymore. You can work with species that are just like a bit lower in terms of these elements, while still be able to keep them and maintain them for a long time. What this means for municipalities is, to me, in short, this list. Like what was already said in the beginning, you can ask for natural and 100% bio-based materials. You can ask for hardwood from sustainable or certified forestry. What is also important is that you can ask for attributes or application instead of already asking for a specific species. For example, you can say the species needs to be able to be in contact with water, or it will be used for a footbridge. So calculate how much it should be able to carry. Also, just not ask for one single species, but for example, say azobe or similar. And the last point is to allow shorts. And I think if you make up these elements, you help creating the business case for sustainable forestry, for using the variation that natural forests actually have. And by that, you're also able to maintain the biodiversity that we currently still have in our forest. Luckily. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lisanne. That was great. And the next pathway is strategic geography. And to represent that pathway, we have Lucy Kamall from the UK's Timber Trade Federation to talk to us about where we might want to source timber from and where we might not want to source timber from and what that means. So take it away, Lucy.
There we go, unmute. Oh, can you see my screen? It's only a couple of slides, that's great. Hello, everybody. I am Lucy, and I am ridiculously enthusiastic. What I'm enthusiastic about is creating a world, like Nicky said at the start, in which we have finally woken up to the reality that responsible global forestry and using timber can help us out of the climate crisis that we are facing. I'm the project manager and communications consultant for the UK Timber Trade Federation's dedicated FLEG-T programme. This means I get to tell you we are passionate that good national forest governance, which is internationally recognised, proactively encouraged and supported, is essential to both responsible trade and increasing global forest cover. The pathway of strategic geography essentially means that global forests need good governance. linking increased trade as an incentive towards legal and sustainable management of forest resources. Tropical forests provide beautiful wood for furniture, interiors and objects, and are important sources of naturally durable timbers for specific outdoor uses and in even fresh or salt water. The responsible purchasing policy for timber, which is essential in meeting the UKTR timber regulations, that's the due diligence for importing timber into the UK from outside its borders for the first time. Forest certification helps, definitely, and is a great mechanism for parts of the world which already have good governance in place. But certification is limited to the boundaries of a forest. The UK and EU has nearly 20 years of FLEGT and its prerequisite voluntary partnership agreements, legislation aimed at reducing illegal logging by strengthening sustainable and legal forest management, improving governance and promoting trade in legally produced timber. It supports social, economic and governance change at community and national levels across entire countries that are implementing voluntary partnership agreements, of which there are currently 15. While not without its challenges, FLEGT provides a level of integrity and trust that is valued by exporting nations and their global customers. Good governance across entire countries mitigates corruption and leakage and encourages transparency and trust. A couple of examples for you. Indonesia, the first country granted a FLEGT license under their own SVL car standard, has shown that the pace of deforestation has declined over the past 5 years, The timber it imports for processing is from legal and responsible sources, giving its exports a clear chain of custody and green lane into the UK and EU under our timber import regulations. And during the pandemic, there has been a big demand for Indonesia's timber products. Secondly, Vietnam, VPA country, is now working on the regulations needed to implement the country's timber legality assurance system. In fact, Vietnam's progress on VPA and FLEGT licensing is hugely important to them, not just for their trade with the EU, but for their exports worldwide. For example, VPA or FLEG licensing is not necessary for Vietnam to export to the US market, but the supply chain reassurance, trust, and integrity that it provides is necessary, and that helps demonstrate it. To finish, the COP climate talks are for the first time ever in the UK in November this year. In collaboration with all FLEGT and VPA nations and others, we're calling for international action from all world leaders to make the governance of tropical forest supply chains a major priority. We like setting ourselves big goals. We want policies which improve the value of standing tropical forests and incentivize good governance with enhanced trade benefits. So good governance is essential. When specifying sustainable wood for your city, your national timber trade associations have all the expertise that you need. Use them. Along with the other pathways, they will help you to make sure that the specification is fit for purpose, the right wood for the right job in the right dimensions, and maximize the carbon storage by taking advantage of species' natural durability and planning for its reuse. I think that's me done. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, Lucy. Thank you so much. This is great. This is the momentum that we are building on the diversity of these pathways and approaches to sustainability. So we're halfway through. That's 4. This is exciting because we're going to go from that large global scale, and our next panelist is going to represent local and urban wood, Paul Hodgkiss from Scotland. So Paul, we'd love you to take it away on local urban wood.
Hi there, everybody. Are we all, yeah, we're all good. Okay, well, as Mark said, storytelling is a really, really great way to get message across. And today I'd like to tell you a wee story. So I'm nobody in particular. However, I have got enormous energy and total belief, and this has helped to change some things better than I could possibly have imagined. And as with lots in my life, inspiration is what kicks everything off. And my dad was a mountaineer, and he brought home with him his love for nature in picture and word. Trips away with him, walking through woodlands, ignited a passion in me that still grows today. Every timber surface that I reveal, I'm mesmerized and thrilled by its beauty. About 24 years ago, I machined into a piece of elm. I was actually making a gift. I was trying to win back the love of my life. It did work. And I was completely blown away by this local homegrown species. Prime cuts of elm were available commercially, but it wasn't easy to source the characterful, rough and ragged rural elm. Its internal beauty is formed by unpredictable weather, pruning, nibbling animals, fences, tree houses, and lost cat posters. I used to drive around and I was thinking to myself, I've seen trees getting removed from roadsides, parks. I was thinking, where the hell are they all going? And I found the source. So with the assistance of a good pal of mine in the Arbitect department of the council, I donned my sustainability bandit mask, and we went out and we were pulling logs from piles about to be burnt. We were using ash, elm, sycamore, poplar and others, half burnt, not burnt. Then I got a wee bit more organized. I joined some committees and organizations to promote the use of homegrown hardwoods. And we really did play a really important part in improving the commercial viability of the timber use. I met others involved in from academics to sawmillers. One in particular was to become a perfect example of success. Jim Burley from Scottish Wood, which is a social enterprise company. Right now, actually, we're using elm, ash and lime from a relatively new small mill in Loch Awe. The trees have been felled for a new power line running from Loch Awe to Kintyre. So driven with a desire to show everyone how beautiful our pesky, no-value, local, rural timbers are, I've designed a brand that has found its way into public environments. We've inspired others and we've helped to create demand. And today, these trees are well looked after. They're valued now and they're auctioned into a great system of local and rural mills. And I'm truly delighted with the timber's success. I persuaded Glasgow City Council to donate its felled elm and sycamore in my bid to show the world how beautiful our local trees are in the design and production of medal trays, quaichs and podiums for the Glasgow Commonwealth Games. All medal winners took a wee bit of Glasgow home to far-flung places in the form of a handmade quaich. But I would like to focus on now the truly forgotten trees, on wild grown, on abandoned environments and waste grounds. One such area was earmarked for a project to build a new medical centre in Govan, the site of an ex-railway and aluminium works. 16 trees were marked for felling, just poplar, willow, alder, lime, Swedish whitebeam, and other species that are really just forgotten weed scrubland. I suggested that we use the timbers for the interior. So there was a total of 7 miles taken to get the trees from site to workshop back in for fitting. We used 3.8 cubic meters. We saved £3,622 in timber purchase. And the site timbers disposal were zero. Education and awareness of these timbers was huge. All the wild grown species that I have found out is that they're all very similar in colour and character. And this creates a broad spectrum of use and collectively a good volume. Can we look to educate, create business and start another drive to create value for these trees? Could we do this? Let's say, for example, if residential and commercial projects required felling, to be legislated through planning law to use the wood. And there's some great potential from that, is that residential housing market, they could have extra value with a selected number of bespoke houses on the site, which have got a really lovely story to tell because they've got their finishings made from these timbers. There's timber processing businesses, there's apprenticeships, sustaining a future of traditional crafts and skills, and of course, local and rural employment. And, these wee trees, one small tree of a relatively nondescript species, not the regular known ones, You know, this week they could produce 140 linear meters, say for example, of a skirting or a facing, and being of all this general colouring, you put them all together and you get a beautiful overall visual of nature within the building in question. So, as I say, I hope that my story can reach people. I believe there's people listening who are probably in a position to action some of these potentials. And I hope this reaches you. So thank you very much for listening.
Wonderful, Paul. Thank you so much. That was great. And you know, the scale of local urban wood from local and urban forests is immense. And so I think this is just a powerful story to help everyone look at those resources and say, what is it? What is available within our city? And you know, the city of Montreal, for example, with the ash borer beetle had, I think it was 250,000 ash trees that had to be removed. That's a lot of wood. So there's a lot of wood in cities, and incorporating that has got enormous potential. Thanks for that inspiration. We're now going to go to Paul Toyne, who's going to talk to us about the pathway on wood reuse and long life. Paul is the Global Sustainability Director for Grimshaw Global. So Paul, if you take it away.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I'm just having a problem sharing my screen. I don't know if Matt can put the slide up for me. That might be easier. It's, for some reason it hasn't come through. So let me begin anyhow. Yes, thanks very much for the introduction. So I lead Grimshaw's approach to sustainable and regenerative design. Grimshaw is a global architectural and urban design practice. I've also had the opportunity for the last decade of working with Nicky Gavron and other commissioners in helping to drive sustainable development in London. So today, I thought I would illustrate the wood reuse pathway and take a city perspective. So if we go to the next slide, what I really want to cover is why wood reuse matters. What is that legislative background in London that could potentially drive the reuse of wood? And what are the current activities that we're doing, and where can you go for more information? So if we go to the next slide, let's just remind ourselves, we are talking about London Climate Action Week, and wood is a biogenic material. So if we don't reuse it, then we get in a situation where it's either going to rot, decompose, or maybe we incinerate it. And the problem with that is that CO2 and methane results from that. And so that then contributes to future climate change. The other reason why the reuse of wood matters is actually it's a bit of a wasted opportunity if we don't reuse waste. And if you look at some of the stats here, I show you on the slide. First, from a UK perspective, the majority of timber that we reuse is for chipping. And actually, when you look at the principles of the circular economy, that's a real low value product. Only 2.5% of all our reclaimed timber is actually reused or remanufactured. And then if we go into a London context, we find that most of our London's construction and demolition waste comes from refurbishment and demolition projects. And we may have a high recycling rate for things like steel, but we've got a very low recycling rate for inorganic materials. It's less than 8%, and only a small proportion of that is from wood. So there is a real opportunity at a city level to be reusing wood. If we go to the next slide, and we'll be talking about the fact that what are the policy drivers? Well, you don't need to read this slide, but it comes from the London Plan for 2021, which are spatial development strategy for Greater London. And there are positive policies that are attempting to promote the reuse and repurposing of construction products, including wood and wood products, to also reduce carbon emissions and having a preference to avoid the demolition of buildings in the first case, so promoting adaptive reuse. And I think here is the challenge. The challenge for London and other cities is to create a secondary materials market. And in London, we're starting to explore that. We're looking at creating key city clusters for important materials that can be reused and repurposed. And one project I'd like to end with is an example of the EU circuit program that has a number of cities, including Copenhagen, Hamburg, Helsinki region, and London. contributing with a number of organisations and businesses. So on a particular project which involves Grimshaw, we're looking at the technical and logistical feasibilities of upcycling reclaimed timber into new building components. And to do that, we've formed a partnership with Simple Works, and the process takes the following steps. First of all, it's all about urban mining. Where do you find the timber that you might want to use to reclaim or upcycle? So how do you go about finding it? Where do you get your information around the current demolition of sites? Then you've got to understand to characterize and prepare the reclaimed timber for remanufacturing. And then when you're remanufacturing, and we're looking at new laminated timber building components in this particular example, but then you've got to test those materials to make certain they comply with building regulations and codes. And then we're looking, and this is all about what the project's trying to do at the moment, is we are then comparing that data together with virgin timber data. And then the outputs are recommendations for design and construction teams on deconstruction, regrading, manufacturing, and actually incorporating design of reclaimed timber laminated building components. And there are a number of outputs from this, and I'll conclude by saying there is, if you go to the final slide, there are links which you might find useful. If you go into the Circuit website, you'll find links to a guide on resourcing reclaimed construction materials. That's published by the partners for this program. You'll also find guides for deconstructing buildings for circular reuse and how to source and use reclaimed materials, including wood, on timber. And finally, just on the right-hand side, that's the pathway, number 6, wood reuse. And back to you, Scott.
Paul, thank you. That was amazing. I should also just thank Grimshaw for being a participant in this project from the beginning. And it's just exciting to see where innovation is meeting the demands of each of these pathways. And this demand for to be able to incorporate reused wood into these really high technology buildings and building products is fundamental. And it's really exciting that design thinkers like Grimshaw are really leaning into this. That's a great segue to our next pathway, which is high efficiency production. And I'd like to welcome Michael Ramage, the privilege of being a fellow student of Michael's back at our days at MIT. Years ago, Michael is now the deputy head of the Department of Architecture at Cambridge. So Michael, please take it away and talk to us about high efficiency production.
Great. Thank you very much, Scott. Thank you, Nicky. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Yes, I am in the architecture department at Cambridge University, and I also lead the Center for Natural Material Innovation. And our aim is very much to move from a past of extracting and exploiting our resources towards a future where we cultivate our resources in collaboration with nature. And in terms of high efficiency production for engineered wood products, what we're talking about for building the buildings we need in cities comes very much in one of two ways. On the left of the slide, you see the sort of IKEA flat pack style production of cross-laminated timber buildings. And on the right, you see a modular volumetric style of construction, both of which have been shown through built examples around the world to be potential pathways for production of these buildings. And I want to take a look in some detail at each of those in my 5 minutes. And so with colleagues at Perkins & Will and Thornton Tomasetti, we designed a skyscraper for Chicago out of wood. Many of you will know, and I certainly want to acknowledge, that we don't need all that many skyscrapers of any material. Most of the buildings we need are between 3 and 10 stories in cities. But what started as architecture and engineering rapidly became construction and economics. This building was designed to be built modularly. Timber is very light. And the construction site was on a brownfield site next to the Chicago River. And many of our brownfield sites in cities around the world have grown up around our water-based transport system. So the possibility of building volumetrically at much larger scales than you can do when you're moving things by truck on the road emerged from this project. It also was a way to activate many of the riverside or lakeside derelict factories of the American Midwest, and to think of a new, higher efficiency way of building tall buildings at the ground and then moving them into place by barge. So it's rethinking the way we build and deliver buildings is an essential component of high efficiency timber production. And of course, the forests are the essential component, and the sustainability of forests, as you've heard, means that we must have a collaboration between construction and conservation. And that means the most efficient production from our trees. At the moment, about 50% of a softwood tree ends up as lumber, but only if it ends up in a building can we really think about it as a very long-lived product. So we're looking at a cross-laminated timber factory here, which historically have been located directly next to the sawmills. But in fact, I think there's an opportunity for cities that these can be moved well away from the sawmills and much closer to the site of building production. And that's because about 40% of the value of timber comes from these factories and the high-tech jobs and so on that go with them. And lastly, thinking about efficiency, at the moment, it takes about 30 cubic meters of cross-laminated timber to build about 100 square meter apartment. That amount is grown in a forest 40 meters by 40 meters over 3 years. And during that time, of course, the trees themselves will capture carbon as they grow. So 1 kilogram of timber holds the equivalent of 1.8 kilograms of carbon dioxide. And that's because forests are wildly more efficient than our industrial carbon capture and storage processes, because they capture and store the carbon, giving us the oxygen back to breathe. And if we can embed these in long life products, such as this building at Cambridge from 1596, which has been storing its carbon in these beautiful oak beams for a very long time, and all things going well, will continue to do so well into the future. If we think of these buildings as assets, not just transient, but extremely long-term, we can look to a future where large-scale timber buildings can be considered a carbon sink in cities, but that is only if we ensure that these buildings and the wood in them stay in circulation rather than ending up, as we've just heard, as waste. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. That was fantastic, and a great way to sort of link a few of the concepts together with sort of the efficiency of where the wood is coming from, but also how it's being processed and all stages. And that's a great segue to pass the baton to Francesco Pomponi. So from Edinburgh Napier University, Francesco is an expert in really the climate science of wood and forests. And he's going to talk about net carbon accounting, which is, in terms of the climate angle, really where this all kind of becomes real. How do we calculate and understand what those impacts really are? So Francesco, without further ado, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Scott. Can you see my screen? Just
yes.
Fine. Yeah, good. Apologies, everyone. My camera crashed. My laptop says I don't have a camera. I'm staring at it right now, so I don't know what happened, but I'm here. So it's hard to have anything to add after such a fantastic lineup of speakers, but I'd like to draw your attention on a very important point, in my view, and that's the time element of what we've been discussing so far, because everything works beautifully for timber. It's very hard to find anyone out there who thinks we shouldn't be using timber in the buildings, who can, deny the storage potential. It's all well known. The one thing that is crucial is to make sure we understand the difference between the sequestration and the storage, because this happens at very different moments in time. So the sequestration is done by the living tree, and we need standing trees in order to sequester carbon. The storage, as Michael was saying, is done by the building elements made out of timber that we decide to use. And it's important to understand that at the moment, right now, we are in this phase. So we are using our buildings and the emissions are going up, the global temperature is going up. And you can see very clearly that timber is the flat blue line during storage. So we need to make sure that we replant, and that's why the certification is very important, so that the timber that we use in our buildings actually stores the carbon while new trees sequester new carbon out of the atmosphere. If we don't do this, timber is unlikely to contribute to any climate solution. And that's why it's important not just to act in isolation between different professions. So design and certification, understanding the supply chains is all interconnected to make sure that this whole system works. Otherwise, we have a big problem. Another thing that I want to emphasize with the links to the papers is that we don't even need the biogenic carbon for timber in order to demonstrate its superiority compared to the alternatives. Timber is the purple violent plot here, and you got reinforced concrete and steel. Numbers are not important, but you can see that it's lower. So, and these studies, a European-based study, doesn't look into carbon storage. So timber wins hands down because it's a lower carbon material compared to reinforced concrete and steel. So sometimes we get lost into the biogenic carbon element, and that creates a problem because it gives other industries, the steel industry, the concrete industry, grounds to counter-argue these negative numbers when there is evidence that timber is a lower carbon alternative. So we should make sure of this. And the third point, again, very important to me, it's a study from last year. We looked at the global availability of timber against the projected floor area demand globally. And much as I would like to deny what I'm saying, the numbers don't lie. We don't have enough timber to meet the global floor area demand through to 2050. So it's important that we understand how to make the best use of timber. Timber cannot be the silver bullet for the built environment. We need to have a regional foci, and it's very important we understand how can we source timber closer to the projects. How can we use closer to 100% of the trees we fell? These are elements that will need to progress much more quickly, I think, in practice, if we really want to work our way out the climate crisis in the built environment. That's what I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Francesco. Wonderful. Okay, what a great panel. What an honor to have these folks together and working with us. So this is the time where we're going to open for comments and questions from some of our representatives from cities that are here and some expertise of folks working with cities. So we want to take approximately about 20 minutes to have a kind of a Q&A and comment session with these representatives. And Nicky, I want to just ask you to start with if you have any questions or comments for the panel from your perspective, or any just interventions that you'd like to bring to the table for this conversation.
Oh, that's very nice of you. I'm absorbing it all, actually. There's a lot to absorb. And so I think it's better that we crack on and hear from the cities, the city representatives. But I would like to bring in later on, if it's possible, Sam Stacey, who leads on he'll explain, but he leads on Innovate UK for the government, which is a research arm of the government. And he's been the architect of the construction playbook, which is now a guide for people in the UK who are going to use materials, among other things. And I think it would be good to bring him in, because then he could comment on what he's heard and how the construction playbook works in relation to that, which is something I think we're all interested in UK cities.
So in a way, this time is to get a little bit technical on how can cities do this. So just in review, we've identified these pathways. The proposition of the sustainable wood for cities is that there is diversity in how to think about sourcing wood sustainably. We need to have that diversity in our mindsets. Some of these pathways may be easier than others for cities to engage with. Again, I want to remind everyone that the concept is that these can be added together. These are not in any way mutually exclusive, but quite the opposite. They're mutually reinforcing in many cases. For the cities represented here, how can they do this, or what experience do cities have with trying to do work of this nature? We can, Mac, I'm not sure if you're able to spotlight some of the city representatives that are here. We have Gillian Dick from Glasgow here, and what we're going to do is, if for each of the representatives, we'd like just to take a minute or less to make a kind of a comment and or a question to the panel. I'll do my best to moderate if that's needed, but otherwise we'll just have sort of short responses from whoever is most appropriate to respond. And we'll just see where the conversation goes over the next 20 minutes. So Gillian, do you have any comments or questions for the panel along those lines?
I have, thanks Scott. I'll be very quick, and I will apologise. I am in Scotland, so my Wi-Fi may well freeze on me. You froze just before you threw to me.
I'm afraid that might have just happened, Gillian. I don't know if turning the camera off.
Sometimes the UK government does not have jurisdiction over the legal processes in Scotland. So it's sometimes difficult when people refer to the UK government making decisions over areas that they don't have jurisdiction with in Scotland. So there are things that people go, oh, that's UK, and we go, no, it's not. It has nothing to do once you come across the border. So that's the first point. And there's separate legislation in Northern Ireland and Wales as well, but Scotland is very peculiar and very lovely, etc. One quick story, the finite use of trees. Western Isles, treeless, because they used all the trees about 200 years ago to build the boats because it was a fishing culture and didn't replant them, now starting to replant. My final kind of comment, because there's a whole load of things that kind of play into what we're doing in Glasgow, and I put a message in to Paul to say, can we talk, because we could use you as a case study in the woodland strategy we're just starting to write. Stewardship, community management of woodlands, but stewardship. So we have lots of money to plan and deliver woodland, but sometimes it's not the right woodland in the right place at the right time. And we don't, as cities or councils, have ongoing funding to manage that sustainably. So it's not seen as infrastructure for starters, it's not seen as mortgageable, and it's not seen as a positive asset on our books. So that means that we do not get capital funding. We can't mortgage it to get some money in to re-sustain it like we would a bridge or a road or something that's taxed. I'll stop there because I could take up the next hour with lots of things.
That's great. And Julia, in our Cities for Forest network, we're hearing that from cities all over the world that managing green infrastructure and financing green infrastructure is a real challenge. Now, connecting that to timber supply is a kind of another layer, which will be very interesting in the coming years to see how cities can really influence the market to invest through the market in the growing of timber regionally, and that would be for in the sort of the nearby forests. Yes, it's a challenge. There is innovation happening in that space, and we'll all have to keep pressing forward in that. I'm going to see if Valentina from Haarlem in the Netherlands is here and would like to. Hi, Valentina. Great, I see you waving there. Would you like to address the panel?
Yes. I just would like to share some practices from the city of Haarlem, but also from metropolis of region of Amsterdam, with the 33 of the cities and towns around capital of the Netherlands, Amsterdam. So what we did as a community of this region and this community of the cities, we made the guidelines that every city of 33 cities around the region of Amsterdam, they have to work with also with the wood for renovation of the schools, of other buildings, and also for the playing grounds for children. While we made these guidances, the person who coordinated this writing of these guidances, she asked to every one of us, and the same question I would like also ask to you, where you played when you was 10 years old. What was your favorite place and kind of playing ground? And I don't know if you take 1 second to think about when you was 10 years old, but we took all our group of the cities, we thought about it, and the most amazing thing was that the most of the people, when we were 10 years old, we played. Our favorite place was in the wood or with the trees or playing ground made from real trees. So it's actually amazing thing to realize that this is a great material, not only for buildings, for constructing, for terraces, but also for playing grounds for children in our cities and for renovation of schools and other buildings. And I was wondering if somebody from the panel would like to comment it or to have some experiences or thoughts to share about it. Thank you.
Would anyone from the panel like to give a little short, you're going back to the 10, where did you play when you were 10? Is that the question? Valentina? Or we...
Yes, the question is, well, can you recognize, is it recognizable for the panelists, and if they also think it's even more broader than only terraces and stairs and some other parts of the building, but broader to use in the cities?
So looking for questions on wood, the sort of history of wood in your lives. Just
could I possibly say something at all here?
Sure.
Okay, it was poignant that you should talk about memory, and you know how you feel when these lovely memories come up as you remember the places you play. And one thing that I've learned about timber in its use is its tactility, its calming nature. It's, you know, having done like a doctor's surgery, for example, that the comments were that the patients were sitting in a really nice calm atmosphere, and it really played a great part there. And yes, I think that the story of memory, the tactility, the wonderful feeling you get when you're around wood. The one thing that I do know is that it might not be for everybody's interior design requirements, but I have never met anybody who says they do not like wood. So I think it's really important to keep that story going and keep reminding people and just eking out. They won't be thinking about it, but when you eke that question out like you just did, you know, it just brings it back to life and brings the memory back, and people then look at the next piece of wood differently as a 10-year older person, you know. So great, I think great work there.
I'm going to hand the mic to Alex Derek. Alex.
Valentina, apart from agreeing with your question, it's a bit of a leading question because everybody's going to say a tree is the best playground. And obviously it was mine too, and making tree houses. But are you aware of the Austrian studies into comparative classrooms where the same children spent a month in a traditional form of construction classroom, namely concrete and plasterboard, and then an equivalent classroom made of wood? Do you know those studies?
No, but it would be great if you could send a link or so
sure,
I
yeah.
can read more about it.
Let's get together. I mean, effectively, the net result was that, and quite understandably, the timber classroom was a far more calming environment in which the children were more able to focus. They came to this conclusion by recording heart rate, which was significantly lower, and that things like respiratory problems, breathing difficulties, or children with asthma, and even skin issues was significantly less too. So as not only an intellectually beneficial environment, it was physically better for them. For example, things like the vagus nerve, which controls the heart's susceptibility to coronary problems, which is obviously not a problem in children at that age, but nevertheless they detected that the vagus nerve was significantly more, should we say, able to deal with any issues. So it's a kind of no-brainer, I think. And
could I ask you to, you've got the floor, could I ask you to pivot it, because you have a lot of experience in basically the procurement side of this. So, you know, if we accept that the demand for wood, whether it's through our awareness of its health and well-being benefits or its climate benefits or others is growing, how do cities do a better job of that procurement side of it and the contracting of this?
Okay, I'm going to be devil's advocate now, because I think so far the discussion is kind of based on preaching to the converted, should we say. So I want to talk about the elephant in the room. And like Mark and Lisanne, I come from a Dutch background where we're allowed to be direct. So I'm going to cut to the chase and say that, mind you, I would like to say that my context is as a director of a company, DRMM, who introduced engineered timber to the UK contemporary architecture scene in 1995. So do not mistake me for a cynical somebody who wants to pour cold water on this discussion, because I count myself as the long-standing advocate of timber in architecture and education. So nevertheless, my experience, you know, because we've done several buildings since the first, which was Teasdale School, we've done several timber projects, but for every timber project we have done, there have been so many that were not possible. And I want to talk about that, because that's to do with the relationship of cost and regulation. So whilst the cost of CO2 heavy materials, steel and concrete in particular, but also brick, so whilst the cost of carbon heavy materials is more, only law will quickly enough affect climate change. I'm talking about regulations, policy, legal obligation, because no amount of motivation or education or exemplar projects will make developers pay more for wood, you know, when existing policy allows them to pay less for steel and concrete. That's a push comes to shove. This is the reality we're with. So on top of that problem of cost and regulations, we have in Britain, so this is the London perspective, okay? And the post-Grenfell perspective. And for those listening who don't know what I'm talking about with post-Grenfell, that was the tragedy of the fire in a tall building, which was nothing to do with concrete, nothing to do with timber. It was a concrete building clad in toxic plastic materials, which burnt very quickly. And as a net result of that inquiry, timber is included in the banned materials for buildings. So you cannot build a building above 18 meters in timber in the UK now with timber in the facade. So, but you know, we must compare this to another context, say France. So at the exact moment when Britain bans timber in construction, France obliges architects to include timber in construction, a minimum of 50% timber in public buildings. So, you know, my question is, when will planning and building control oblige the use of FSC timber over carbon heavy materials such as steel and concrete? I guess this question should first of all be directed at Nicky Gavron and then wider in terms of perhaps the cost. But I think the regulation issue is the key.
And if I can frame that even a little bit more specifically, Alex, towards the city's role in that, do cities have agency in that kind of policy shaping, either currently or might they have in the near future as climate issues become more important and politically viable? So I don't know if Nicky, you want to take a first crack at that, and then I see Paul and Sam both have their hands up, so we'll go after you, Nicky, to Sam.
Well, I would. You have to put the lights. Sorry, sorry, I don't know. Yes, well, there is. You know, I'm very concerned about this, the combustible materials ban, and at the moment, we don't know the answer yet whether the 18 meters is going to be reduced to 11 meters. But I think. And there's been a lot of nervousness recently, not just about timber, but about buildings in general, building safety. And I really think that in a sense, we've got to, I really think the timber industry we've got to, I know a lot of people now are working on providing the evidence, because it's well known, I think, that, you know, this new construction material, structurally engineered timber is, you know, incredibly strong and chars and doesn't burn in the way that is being leveled at it. But we do need the evidence, and I wonder if there are others on the panel who would be able to say more about this. In London, we can, the mayor has said that his affordable housing program, and none of those buildings can be timber. But in fact, of course, there's a lot of construction going on outside the affordable housing program. But we've just got to come up with the evidence as quickly as possible. All those who really understand how important it is that we can use timber in construction.
Now, Nicky, before we go to, I'm going to go to Sam next, but I want to take my moderator prerogative to steer us back towards the question of sustainability. For those in deep into the timber conversation, there's many different sort of categories of sort of barriers and concerns, one being fire regulations, others insurance, etc. Now, the purpose of this conversation today is focusing on proving out and exploring the sustainability profile. And so that's another category, right? So if we get through the regulations on fire safety and insurance, etc., building codes, we're still left with a question, which is how do we effectively source from a sustainable source through these different pathways? So maybe, I don't know, Sam, does that still give you a doorway to enter the conversation?
I was picking up a bit really on what Nicky kindly referenced earlier, which is the construction playbook, which is a document that mandates rules for the UK government procurement of buildings, which includes a clause that all procuring agencies, all clients should lay out strategies for achieving net zero. So through my Transforming Construction program, we've created a range of tools to facilitate that, including in particular the value toolkit, which really drills down into the detailed decisions that you make when procuring a building. And I think the pathways that we've been talking about on this is going to be a really helpful contributor to that. So Michael Ramage is a major contributor to my Transforming Construction program. But I think, you know, at a broad level, at a high level, we've got a lot of the key drivers, the key levers in place to force sensible decisions around these things. And yes, we do have to get down to the detail and make sure that we're overcoming the barriers, you know, like fire regulations and so forth, that may be a problem. But I think we're closing in on the problem, and we're putting in place the fundamental levers to make progress with this. And the detailed work that some of the people on this call, including Michael, are doing is really helping us down that path.
Paul, I'd like to go to you. You had your hand up as well.
Yes, thanks, Scott. I just wanted to make the observation of the significance or importance of taking a whole life carbon approach, particularly in the built environment, and building on the presentations from both Michael and Francesco at the end. So there is, I mean, particularly going back to the London perspective, a requirement that new developments of certain sizes must take a whole life carbon approach. And that's really important because we have a lack of data at the moment and a lack of transparency about the trade-offs and implications between some of these costs, like, for example, Alex was mentioning, and also where the value is and the potential benefits. And until we start to get a better understanding of that information, so we can start, so city officials and procurement strategies can make really sensible, intelligent decisions around the promotion of particular low carbon intensity materials, like, for example, timber and other timber products. I think we're struggling a bit. And we're starting to see that change. In the last 18 months, there's been a whole new movement talking about upfront carbon or embodied carbon and the significance that it would have for all this future construction and development that we're going to start to see. So I think that's one lever where that can be used to start to talk about the benefits around making choices for wood and for timber products in construction.
Great, thank you, Paul. I'm just realizing, not surprisingly, the time has gotten away from us. It's 10, where we are, 10:29. I should have mentioned at the beginning, we are going to keep this call open. I won't say indefinitely, but at least for another half an hour. I know some of you will have to jump off, but we welcome anyone who would like to stay and continue this conversation to do so just as long as you'd like. And so I think what we're going to do is just, I'll say a thank you now to all of the panelists and all who have joined, and just a hearty invitation to follow up with us. I want to thank my team, Mac Phillips and Sophie McCallum, who have been working very hard at this platform under the Cities for Forest umbrella and a broader team. And again, I just like to keep talking to whoever can stay in this. I see a lot of friends and familiar faces in the Zoom. So with that said, please do contact. We will share the presentation. We will share this recording, and we'll actually keep the recording going as we move into our kind of coffee time and continue discussion starting now. So Lisanne, would you like to contribute? I see your hand is up.
I think that's a legacy hand if it is up.
Is it?
No, I shortly wanted to contribute to the cost aspect of Alex's point. And I also think if we start to, if we look at cost, normally we only look at the material cost, but we don't look so much at the climate cost or the nature cost that materials also take. We don't normally incorporate them in prices. And for example, at the moment, I see many cities doing climate adaptation projects or regreening projects. And sometimes I think, well, if you would directly use this with materials from sustainable forestry, for example, you sort of double your impact. And I think if you consider it that way, that with good materials, you can have a positive impact in terms of forest conservation or purifying water, things where you would otherwise also make cost. It brings a different calculation, I think.
Absolutely. And cities are spending a lot of money on projects like this, so getting some of those dollars moved towards sustainable sourcing seems reasonable. I'm going to ask everyone to use the raised hand function, because it pushes you to the top of the bar, and then I can see who's got something to say and some questions, and that includes the city representatives. Maria from Malmö, Sweden. I'm not sure if you're on the call and would like to contribute, and Jonathan Mears from City of London. Please raise your hand if you'd like to I address the group here. And I see Paul Fugue and Jeff Spiritos, both from our Wood at Work community of practice, with their hands up. So Paul, I'll go to you for a minute. You're on mute there, Paul.
That probably works. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone, for the wonderful and depth conversation, and also just the commitment to this broad and incredibly important field. My current work is procuring wood directly from forests and manufacturing products that are made from North American and forests in South America. The issue that we're focusing on now is decarbonization of manufacturing. Sorry about this phone. Decarbonization of manufacturing, and I noticed that it didn't get brought up as much during this conversation, but it's a great opportunity to expand the production of wood to not only sequestering and storing carbon, but also removing carbon from the manufacturing. And just to leave you with a simple image, if you look at a wood processing factory and you look at the area that's exposed to the sun, that area exposed to the sun typically would provide all of the energy needed to do all of the processing and the manufacture of the wood. And that's something that is an opportunity so that you actually have wood products that are not just carbon neutral or low carbon, they're negative carbon.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Paul. That's Paul's got tremendous experience in this field, and the challenge of looking at the whole life cycle and what is the real net carbon impact is very real. And I guess you're speaking about solar energy that could drive the production and remove that whole chunk of carbon from the process. So
yeah,
that
by setting that as a requirement and saying, we're looking at this product coming out of our factory, where can we take fossil fuels out of the production? And so without elaborating, there is a very clear, direct pathway that's specifically applicable also to community forestry and small scale, local to cities operations, where you can really then, and I don't remember the panelist's name, you can also tap into a city's real need to reduce their carbon footprint. Well, if you bring things into the city that are negative carbon, then you really go a long way.
Thank you, Paul. We'll go to Jeff, then Jillian, then Sitze. Jeff is a developer, so using the products that we're talking about here in application. Go for it, Jeff.
Well, thank you, Scott. Great to be here. So we are proper mass timber developers, East Coast US, with activities all over the US and Europe. And it seems to me that France is a real leader in figuring out how to motivate the use of mass timber. We're all on the same schedule here. We're all on the path to carbon neutral by 2050. More and more cities are going to wake up to the need to use sustainably harvested materials for bettering their cities and the world. And Alex, I would just say to you, first of all, great to meet you, that the mass timber produced of today is not going to be the mass timber produced of 5 years from now. This is, as a growing industry, we all know and believe that we're going to find less expensive, more efficient solutions that are going to help address this cost issue. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Jeff. That's a great point. I mean, the innovation potentials are so huge, and I think the innovation on the ability to account for the carbon is growing rapidly as well. So even within a few years, we'll have a much clearer picture of what the embodied carbon is, including the entire life cycle of a wood product.
Can I come in on that for a moment?
Yes, please, Nicky.
Scott, sorry, my camera's not on, but just to say that I've just been looking at what's happening, globally, and it's very interesting. I think what's happening in France. It was mentioned, but they're bringing in a regulation this year which weights embodied carbon. So this idea that Paul was talking about of the upfront carbon, they're going to weight the embodied carbon within the life cycle analysis, which will give a tremendous stimulus to using timber in construction. And I think that's probably the catalyst that's coming all over the world.
That's a great example of how regulation can really boost, remove barriers and put a strong pressure on the market.
Yeah, and I did want to say one thing that Grenfell was mentioned, but one of the few things standing at the end were the very, very thick fire doors made of wood. Just as a point.
Thanks. That's a great reminder of wood's performance potentials. Gillian.
I'm going to say two things. I'm going to try and bring stuff back around. So sometimes as a planner, and I hold my hand up and say I'm a town planner, I'm not an architect, I'm not a landscape architect, we can provide policies or strategies, whether it's from government or local government, that says we're going to be using sustainable products, we're going to be reusing, reimagining, but the different legislative track that building warrants and building engineering runs on may well not be running at the same speed or in the same time frame as us. So we could stipulate tomorrow in most planning strategies from most councils, we want to see 50%, 60%, 70% more wood used. But if the building standards that give them the completion certificates and the insurance sign off says that that's not a suitable product, it will get engineered out. So it needs a legislative change at UK and devolved government in a UK context place. The other one that just sprung to mind when we were talking about burning wood, the Japanese tradition of burning the wood before you used it to protect it and keep it. There's always been a fear about burning wood, but actually burnt wood is good. And we maybe need to change the story and the narrative that we put around wood and its performance. And if you look at native indigenous woodland in places like Australia, it only survives by being burned.
Yeah, there's some complexity there because there's charring the surface versus burning it. I think that the fear is that wood waste just gets burned to deal with the waste, and that is very detrimental to the climate. But management through the use of fire, which is a hotly debated topic, forgive the pun, but also different treatments of wood, they're all part of the mix. Rosie, you have your hand up.
It was just to come in on this point. I think we're probably all of us on this call keen to see the use of wood in construction and see some of these barriers addressed. But I think it just highlights the need for these different pathways, because as was said before, wood is a finite resource. So we do need to be thinking about most efficient use, the lesser known timber species, thinking about the most efficient use of the timber, reuse, and obviously looking at the sustainable forestry to make sure those forests stay. So I think we just always have to keep in mind that although we're pushing for more wood, we have to be thinking about, we can't just indefinitely ask for more and more wood. We need to be thinking about the other issues, and I think that's why that's important, those different synergies. One of those pathways is not going to address the solution. We are going to have to look at all of these different ones together.
Thank you, Rosie. Thanks for bringing us back to that concept. Very, very important. Sietse from the Netherlands, from Probos. You're on mute, Sietse, right now.
Not anymore. Yes, I'd like to contribute to Mark's presentation on community-based forest management. And
the remark of Lisanne on doubling the impact while including climate aspects as well. I think if we are able to at least in part organize the direct sourcing of timber from these communities, we might even have an opportunity to triple impact because of our contribution to livelihood development of these communities.
Thank you. The social forestry pathway really focuses on how the procurement of from a particular community has so many benefits beyond the kind of strict carbon cycle piece, right? Because you're investing in livelihoods, which then invest in forests. So I love that idea of tripling. I think we should be penciling that out as often as we can, and including that in the net carbon benefit calculation that we've included as a pathway as well. Thank you. Teasdale has tremendous experience working with communities around the world and in the tropics. So we've been learning a lot from you and Mark at Provost. So thank you for your contributions. Who's next? Is Matt Stevenson? There you are. Matt is working on a phenomenal project in the Glasgow area of Scotland, a prototype housing unit made of locally grown Scottish timber. Matt, what would your reflections be on what you've heard today?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Yeah, I guess to amplify a lot of the points that have been made. So yeah, thanks for that introduction to the project that we're doing. Just to give it a bit more context, so that unit uses the UK's first homegrown mass timber products. We've produced cross-laminated timber, glue laminated and nail laminated timber products for that build. And we're on an exciting sort of roadmap to commercializing the homegrown mass timber products, which I think is, I'm sure everyone will agree, is well overdue in the UK. So looking forward to taking that forwards, and obviously the focus of that is very much how do we add value to that homegrown resource, and how do we take the opportunity in doing that to use it as efficiently as possible to innovate around it. So a great point was made that the mass timber products in 5 years' time won't be the same as today, and I think we've got an opportunity as late to the party in the UK to actually mix it up a bit and see with that with the resource that we've got available, well, how do we put that together? How do we not just compete on a commodity basis, and rather look at opportunities to innovate around what we produce as a product. So yeah, all of that I think amplifies a lot of the points that have been made. Scott, it's been great working with you and a number of people on the panel and in this group today to look at other ways that we can collaborate and innovate and use some imported product alongside our focus on the homegrown material. And again, it's opened up some really valuable conversations from my point of view. How do we use the right species in the right place, the right product and the right solution to respond to the different contexts, and certainly look forward to an aggressive timeline between now and COP26 to roll some of those ideas and innovations out and see that come together and be showcased at COP26 in Glasgow. We're manufacturing the product just south of Glasgow, so really well placed to contribute at COP, but also to see that as a punctuation point, on a much more important sort of overarching journey forward. So that'd be great. So yeah. Eulogize about the opportunities that we can all deliver through collaboration. It's a very exciting future ahead.
Thank you, Matt. One of the really cool innovations that Matt's team is working on is a nailing system, a nail lamination that uses wooden nails made from beech. So hardwood nail, air-driven, no glue, can actually create a mass timber product. I was really blown away, and that actually brings in the sort of collaboration geographically, where you can imagine in the future, near future, where species from different geographies can be brought together to optimize these building products and match the diversity of landscapes. So if we think forward even a few years, where we're looking at global forest systems and sustainable sourcing, that's going to look very different from different parts of the world, that can be brought together appropriately with energy profiles and even transportation footprints included in that, into the highest efficiency, best carbon sequestration, and most user, appropriate products. That's a pretty exciting future, I think, on the very near horizon. I mean, and there's examples of that happening already.
Yeah, great.
I see some folks here who do not have hands up that I'm about to call on, just because I know they always have good things to say. But if there's anyone else who has a comment or a question, please do use the raise hand or just wave your hand on the screen if you'd like to say something. Kelly Harrison.
Hello, hi. Sorry, I couldn't work out how to raise my hand, so this had to do. I think I'm really interested in the idea of what we were saying France was doing earlier, and weighting the early stages of the life cycle assessment. I think that could really make a big difference. And I'm just wondering, I've been in discussions with the Institute of Structural Engineers here at the UK at the moment, and their approach, and it's very much in line with RICS and British standards. And I just don't know if anyone on this call knows what the route is to try and change that or influence it. Is it just talking to the structure directly, or would it be somebody else somewhere else that we have to go to?
Does anyone on the call have something specific on this? Is the engineering associations in the UK specifically? Maybe there's some American or other geographic examples. Is that your question, Kelly? Is how to bring the engineering community on board?
Yeah, exactly. Or just the certification. How do we actually make that change like France is doing? Do we have to go all the way to the top to government, or is there someone in between that we can talk to?
You mean about embodied carbon?
Yeah, about changing the approach to the life cycle assessment to weight because obviously we're in an emergency, so timber's a much better material to use right now, removing the carbon up front rather than at the end of the life of the building.
Yes. Well, the World Green Buildings Council has published on bringing embodied carbon up front, and there's a group in London actually, led by the London Energy Transformation Initiative, called LETI, which is about 1,000 professionals from across the spectrum getting together. And they've just produced, if you look at their website, they've just produced guidance. So the beginnings of how, the first thing is you've got to have some sort of benchmarks, some sort of alignment, because it's a bit like the Wild West out there at the moment, because everyone's claiming, also making claims about carbon, but they're not actually, they're not consistent. So first of all, we've got to have some consistency about how we measure it. But then the minute we've got that, and already we're getting planning applications it's being demanded that you should put in a whole life carbon assessment. London's already doing that. That's the Mayor of London. But that's on the big schemes. But we need to move as fast as possible towards accepting that. And then the weighting has to come in. But we need to be actually gathering examples from around the world, which is what I've been trying to do, and what the C40 is doing. But we should be quoting France, I think, here. But I just tried to give you a bit of an overview. We're behind in terms of, we haven't quite got there yet in terms of a whole life cycle assessment, carbon assessment. We're almost there in terms of actually having something which is consistent and against which you can set targets. But the UK Green Buildings Council is looking at targets. The World Green Buildings Council is looking at targets. They've set a target of 50% by 2030 in the reduction of carbon emissions. So we're getting there.
I'll just add quickly a couple of thoughts on this. One is that engineers and the engineering community is an absolutely critical piece of this ecosystem. And in two categories, probably more than two, but two come to mind. One is essentially leaning forward into taking risks, I guess, as engineers basically are, the group who are able to, through their careful planning and calculations, certify that a building is structurally sound. And so I think there's a lot of space for engineers to keep pushing on that and keep putting their stamp on buildings that they believe in. Another is taking the same skill set, the same systems thinking skill set, and applying it more and more into the carbon assessment. So I think there's a transfer of knowledge from the engineering community that pushes its way into the LCA world. The LCA world, from our experience, is very almost completely underdeveloped in terms of the net carbon profile of wood, right? So there's a sort of, right now there's a sort of a wall you hit in the LCA where you're trying to say, well, yes, but wood shows up, what is it contributing or not contributing? And the answer is, for the most part right now, there's not good data on this. The answer is really like, we don't really know. And in fact, a piece of wood sourced through the social forestry pathway, as Asitse was mentioning, might have a vastly different carbon profile given its contribution to forest management than a piece of commercially sourced spruce from the Canadian North. So there's a huge area of opportunity for sophisticated net carbon profiling of wood that then plugs into the LCA system, and we don't have that right now.
I think, sorry, I didn't actually introduce myself. I'm a structural engineer. I work for Whitney Wood. I'm also on the board of the directors for TD Timber Development UK, and we have a sustainability group there that's just been set up, and they're hoping to set up a website very soon, which will drill into some of those things that you were just talking about. So yeah, hopefully we'll have some better information on that soon.
Thank you, Kelly. Paul, Brandon has his hand up. Love to hear what you have to say, Paul.
Hello, and hello everybody. Obviously we all get very excited about tall new wooden buildings or building anything new out of wood, but the existing building stock needing to be renovated and retrofitted is equally important. You could argue actually more important, but let's not have that debate. But up there in the amount of wood that's going to be needed to successfully renovate and retrofit. At a European level, the target between now and 2050 is to renovate and retrofit 195 million buildings, which is 75% of the European building stock. Now, virtually all of that needs to have better thermal insulation. So what will we use? What material will we use? And at the moment, we use less than 1% of materials in thermal insulation that are organic, which would be wood or wool. So 99% of what we do with insulation at the moment is fossil fuel based. So there's two ways of looking at it, where the negative way is that this is a flipping disaster, which is true. Secondly, the more positive way is this is a huge potential market for wood-based products. And I'm pleased to say that the key advisor to the European Commission on this, to the president of the Commission herself, President von der Leyen, who in a speech last September to the European Parliament referenced the need to turn the built environment from a carbon emitter into a carbon sink through the use of materials such as wood. And she actually named it in September in the speech to the Parliament, much to our pleasant surprise. She's been advised by Professor Schnellenhuber from Germany, from the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, and his work academically, which many of you will be aware of, which is about turning the built environment from being an emitter into a carbon store by the use of wood. And the amount of wood involved is such that there are some question marks that have to be asked, as which one of your panelists did say, is there enough wood to do all of what we need? So even to get up to 20–30% of the insulation at a European level coming from wood is a heck of a lot more wood. So we've got some challenges there, but we've also, to look at it positively, there is a heck of a big market out there for organic products such as wood in the renovation and retrofitting world, not just in the new build. And the two together, massive market.
And actually, Paul, that the fiber-based products like insulation can help with this efficiency challenge, which is, as Michael pointed out, you know, 50% of a tree's mass getting into a long life building is a high percentage. It's actually often less than that. So all of that other wood, that other 50% or 60% is going somewhere. A lot of it's going to pulp and paper products now, which are short life products. So if we divert some of that waste stream, quote unquote waste stream, into products like insulation, fiber-based insulation, I mean, that's kind of an essential piece of this future. We're getting into long-term storage, the whole tree.
Yeah, I agree with that, but just be careful about this idea that short life wood products are necessarily in some way intrinsically bad. I would much rather have a paper cup than a plastic cup. Mm-hmm. So just, we need to think it through carefully. Yes, we need to have more wood going into long life products, but we do need some wood to go into short life products, because both sets of products are substituting for fossil fuel based materials. So both are doing a good thing. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks for that reminder. And also recycling those paper products. There's products which are made of recycled paper, which is wood fiber, that have a life as insulation. So Nicky just pointed out, there was a plan to talk a little bit about the COP event coming up. And Christian, I see your hand is up, so we'll get to you in a second. But I want to just pivot us a little bit to the idea that at the COP 26 in Glasgow, there's been discussion among some of this network about a sustainable wood district. And Matt Stevenson's project would be potentially a keystone in that they're planning to be physically present with a building on the COP site. There's a lot of unknowns about the COP event in terms of how many people are going to be coming and from where. But I just want to put it on the table, because it was mentioned in the agenda, that the idea of bringing these diverse perspectives, for example, certification, Rosie, I'm looking at you, and Christian, the FSC representatives, the Timber Trade Federation has plans for a physical structure that's either going to be in London and or possibly partly in Glasgow. So the idea of bringing a kind of a group together that represent these different pathways strikes, I think, many of us as having a lot of potential for bringing harmony to the conversation, even though the diversity of perspectives and experience is very real. So I'm going to float that, and I will go to you, Christian. If you want to comment on that, that's great. If you have another comment, that's also fine.
Just try to unmute.
Yes,
you can hear me. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for the word. I think when I'll just comment on the carbon and the LCA. I think there is something that we should keep on reminding ourselves on is all these non-carbon aspects. There is, because we talk about carbon, but climate is so much more. So also for all the physical things that goes on in a forest, on forest level, we need to be much better, and in including this could be sun reflection. This could be actually also these indirect things like avoided deforestation. If there was an LCA factor on that, we would definitely have stronger support for sustainable forestry than we have today. So that's just a few points from that. And for the event, let's hope the world opens up and see what we can do to communicating sustainable timber from all over the world. Normally I would talk a lot about less known timber species, but I also think Lisanne mentioned the most important aspects. So yeah.
Does anyone have a response or some thoughts about bringing this conversation to COP in the world at that event?
Scott, let me just, people I'm sure know, but just to say it in case some don't, that France has featured mass timber buildings for the 2024 Olympics, right? And the entire Athletes Village and many other buildings are all built out of mass timber construction starting already. And so that kind of approach to COP26 would be absolutely wonderful.
Thank you, Jeff. Others? Lucy, I'm looking at you from TTF, or Matt, or Nicky, but I'm scanning the different video boxes to see who I might call on to talk about this.
Well, I think that just to pick up on your note there, the copy is going to be hugely important. It's a moment in time where not too little, too late. We need something to motivate people, motivate legislation. That's one thing that's been coming across really strongly, is that a lot of these ambitions need to be grounded in law, in regulation, in countrywide governance around the world, not just from the forests, but also in procurement law as well. And I don't think it is about replacing wood products with replace everything with wood products, regardless of its ability to be fit for purpose. It has to be the right product. And various kind of groups that I'm involved with, the idea of, you just replace everything with wood, and then you end up, well, no, because if steel is a better option, then you're going to be using steel for a certain amount of structure. But use your mass timber structure for the flooring, use it for your paneling. Use those opportunities that you've got for the insulation that my colleague Paul Brannan was talking about. So to actually embed that in legislation, and I think the COP is going to be a really fundamental place to make sure those conversations are had. Just from a very, very simple point of view, we're coming at it from two pathways, the Timber Trade Federation in the UK. One is the tropical timber side of things, to make sure that that proper governance is in place and proper attention and debate is had about how that comes about, making sure that the timber is properly valued while it is still within its own country's borders. And the second point is building with wood, having a political manifesto. Essentially, it is a political manifesto to advocate for that very legislation. Alex was here. We're talking to him about the timber structure that we're using for the hook, the visual hook to get people interested. We've got a 6-week festival planned for London over the period of the COP. We will, assuming it all goes ahead, we will be at COP in Glasgow. So there's a lot of opportunities here, and yes, we are very busy, and yes, it does sound like quite a lot. Thanks, Scott.
Oh, thank you so much, Lucy. And the idea being that, I certainly don't have a clear picture of what COP will look like, but I would hope that it's not a disparate group of people wandering around talking about wood from different angles, which isn't connected. So to the degree that there's a ability to harmonize, I think would be very powerful.
Absolutely. And we have we've been working very hard to bring together the global timber industry. And I would just put an invitation out there if anyone's wants to contribute or feels that they need to be involved in some way. I'm sure you'll share our contact details after this session, Scott. Please do get in touch.
Scott, Lucy, what I've just heard from Lucy is really music to my ears, because the fact that the emphasis on harmonizing, doing what we can to harmonize legislation would be really marvelous. Regulation, really. We need to move on that.
Yes, absolutely. So we'll definitely share contact details. I'll in the follow-up note, which everyone will get, there'll be an offer to share your details with this group, and we'll make sure everyone has that with them. So I'm looking around. Lars Lestadius, famous forester from Sweden and Washington, D.C. Do you want to contribute some thoughts? Lars has been working on an incredible strategy with thinking about African housing, among other things.
I was on another meeting much of the time, so I haven't been able to follow the detail. I just have this sense that the world is going to need a lot more biomaterials, looking, for example, at population growth and urbanization in Africa, but not only in Africa. And it seems to me that it would be better to form some sort of alliance with competing materials than rather to say that we are going to replace you all. because those materials and vested interests will defend themselves. And a much better strategy would be to come to some sort of commonality that the building sector will need to transition, or we will break the Paris Agreement. I mean, there is just no other way. The building sector needs to transition towards using a bigger proportion of biomaterials, but that doesn't mean that steel and concrete are out. You know, and if one could make that case to the building industry, there is a much better basis for collaboration rather than enmity, because I don't think that enmity is a useful or pragmatic strategy. Thank you, Scott, for letting me put in my 2 cents.
Thank you, Lars.
Scott, that's a tremendously good point. But I think we have to just point out that the world is urbanizing very quickly. I think it's about, 2.5 billion more people coming by 2050. And we really need, and of course, it's going, a lot of the use of wood is hybrid with steel, with concrete. It's just that we're going to need so much construction, so much retrofitting that there's room for everything. It's not about one, but as far as possible, we should be using natural bio-based materials because of the carbon storage.
No, it's a great point. There has been a sense of a kind of a full frontal attack on traditional building materials that has created, I know in New York City, a lot of hostility and backfiring. I think, Jeff, you've borne the brunt of some of that in your development work in New York. So finding the right language to be working together with the construction industry is important and difficult. So there's a good challenge for us, so that it's not just concrete and steel are horrible and wood is the solution to everything, which is, both of those statements are incorrect. And if we're not working together, we're not going to make progress in the way we need to.
Yeah, so Scott and Lars, the challenge is that, do you motivate progress in those carbon emitting industries through cooperation or through replacement? It's similar to the fossil fuel industry. Those guys can convert their activities to clean energy, but what's the best way to get them to do that? They've got a lot of resources to do that. And it's a great question, but I'm not sure the best answer is through cooperation. I'll just say in the US, 90% of all residential buildings in the US is 12 stories and less, 80% of all commercial buildings. So you're going to build, almost all of America from here forward if you go to mass timber. Do you need cooperation with steel and carbon and concrete for that? I really don't think so. And I think, frankly, from my point of view, that they're going to work much faster to figure out ways to decarbonize their product as we replace more and more of them with timber.
Thanks for that perspective, Jeff. Alex, and I'm looking at the clock and sensitive to time, so let's be thinking about wrapping up in the next few minutes, but we can take time for a few more closing comments and thoughts. Alex.
Yeah, just picking up on Nicky and Jeff's words there, which obviously I condone, and Jeff's kind of said it already, but as a practicing architect, who loves timber, one thing that I realized is that it's always combined with other materials, and you just have to minimize the carbon content of every other material. I mean, you can't put timber in the ground. You have to use something else as foundation. So obviously, the future is in hybrids. And I think that, the clever buildings are the ones that are super efficient at using the least of every material, including timber. That's my point. And I've got to go. And thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Alex. Well, perhaps that's a place to wrap up, unless anyone else has a burning closing comment or question. And as I said, we will follow up with some notes and access to the recording. We'd love to stay in touch with everyone, and we're very much going to keep thinking about COP and how to do this, working with the TTF and with Matt and his team and others in Glasgow. So we'll keep everyone posted on that. And
Scott, sorry,
yes. Hi,
this
Sarah.
is Sarah. Oh, I'm sorry. Hi, everyone. I'm another Cities for Forests co-founder. I'm also Scott's wife. And I unfortunately was not able to listen to the bulk of this event, but I have been listening to the conversation. And, you know, just a reminder, or I guess just something to think about for any upcoming COP events, is that, you know, it's important to bring together the conversations on wood. It's also very important to bring together the conversations on forestry and land use with the conversations on wood, which makes things much more complicated, but it's extremely important that we do that. And I know that that's something we're always thinking about, but just in this conversation, I didn't hear much of that. So constantly thinking about what is a forest, where are we getting this wood, which wood is coming from which forests, and engaging people who work in those forests, both you know, leaders of communities, forest ecologists, land use scientists, people who understand that side of it is really, really important at every step of the way. So especially when we start talking about things like harmonizing policies, you absolutely have to have the land use sector on board with those conversations. If you start talking about, you know, we're going to use wood in these different areas, I mean, if you're not using the right kind of wood, as we always say, it's just not going to go well in the future. So just wanted to add that last point there. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Sarah. It's so critical, and sometimes I forget to keep reminding us that that's the forest and the wood have to be always thought of together. That is really the purpose of the Sustainable Wood for Cities platform. So absolutely, we'll keep focused on the forests. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Nicky, for gathering us together. And we just invite you to keep the conversation going through email, and we will see you at an event coming up soon, hopefully. If not before, then at COP26.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Thank you so much.